Yes, Radhika Mataji, would you like to speak? I'm starting the record. Radhika Kasturi Mataji? No, she's not there. Okay. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to Bhakti Sangha Japa group. Today we have again the chapter of 12 chapter, 18 chapters in 18 sessions. So we have Sukha-sagari Mataji to enlighten us on this chapter, 12 chapter devotional service. We are very fortunate to have you, Mataji. Please take over the call.
Thank you, Vinita Mataji, for always helping me out, facilitating this class every week. And I'm grateful to all the Matajis who gave me this opportunity. This is, a big blessing to me to purify myself. So I'm very grateful to all the Matajis and the organizers who are allowing me to do this. So we'll start with the Mangalacharan prayers. And you all can feel free to join in. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. I offer my respectful obeisances unto His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who is very dear to Lord Krishna, having taken shelter at his lotus feet. Our respectful obeisances are unto you, O spiritual master, servant of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami. You are kindly preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya Deva and delivering the Western countries which are filled with impersonalism and voidism. So we see the disciplic succession here, like Prabhupada, his guru, going on all the way up to Krishna. Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I'm sorry, I think I did not put the slide properly. Yeah, we have to chant the Panchatattva mantra and then we'll move to the Hare Krishna mantra. जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhara Pandit, Srivas Thakur, and all the devotees of Lord Chaitanya. Now going to the Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. O Krishna, O energy of Krishna, please engage me in your service. So we are actually, begging the Lord and His energy, His divine energy, Srimati Radha Rani, to engage us in some service, devotional service to them. So that is the prayer when we are chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Generally, Prabhupada has told that it is a very good practice for Bhakti Yoga practitioners to chant 16 rounds, each round of 108 Mahamantras every day. That's a minimum, and we could do more also. But because there is some math involved in these numbers, like the 108, the 16 times 108, and they have some potency, and that's why Srila Prabhupada, has given us this magic number to chant every day. So before we move on, we are going to be discussing chapter 12, which is titled Devotional Service.
Mataji, I do Hare Krishna every morning.
Oh, wonderful. How many times do you do?
I'm not sure. Every day I do a lot.
Wonderful. You should try and keep account, because there is some math to it, and just try next time when you're chanting if you can keep account, okay? Good job. Okay, let's go over a brief recap. So far we have been discussing the middle portion of the Bhagavad Gita, that is from chapters 7 through 11 in the past few weeks. And these middle chapters of the Bhagavad Gita actually detail about Bhakti Yoga. So the first six chapters are considered Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga is sandwiched in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita between chapters 7 and 12. And then from 13 until 18, we have Jnana Yoga. So this is the last chapter in that series of six chapters of Bhakti Yoga. And it is, no wonder it is titled Devotional Service or Bhakti Yoga, because this chapter actually brings in a summary form what all has been discussed in the past six chapters about devotional service. So just a brief recap, and this is actually extracted from the first verse purport by Srila Prabhupada. So what we saw so far is that Krishna has explained both the personal, the impersonal, and the universal form of the Lord. So we saw in the previous chapter how last week, how the universal form of the Lord was actually shown to Arjuna. But what happened was Arjuna was actually losing his balance when he saw that that universal kind of scary form of the Lord, with so many people entering into the Lord's mouths, and it was not a very pleasing sight. So he prayed that Krishna come back to his original form, so that he'll feel much better. So we see from here that Arjuna is very attracted to the personal form of the Lord, and he is not so much interested in the impersonal form of the Lord. So Prabhupada explains that transcendentalists, or people who are interested in the science of God, they are called transcendentalists, and they can be divided into two classes. One is the impersonalist and the other is the personalist. So the personalist devotee, he engages himself with all energy in the service of the Supreme Lord. That is, he engages in Bhakti Yoga and doing service to the personal form of the Lord. The impersonalist also engages himself not directly in the service of Krishna, but in meditation on the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested. So we have seen in the previous chapters that a different form of devotees, like several varieties of devotees who could be demigod worshippers, some worship their forefathers. So, and they may belong to different varnas, or they may belong to different ashramas, and what is the destination for each kind of this practitioner, transcendental practitioner. All that has been discussed in so much detail in chapter 7, and then what is their destination has been discussed in chapter 8, and so on and so forth. And the different opulences of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which is unlimited, are further discussed, from chapter 10 and 11 shows the universal form of the Lord, again, which is an impersonal form of the Lord. So when Arjuna sees this, he is bewildered and he loses his balance. And that's why we understand, like how Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport, that he's attached to the personal form of the Lord, and he's wondering as to why people would even go the impersonal route, because he thinks it's so scary, and he was very uncomfortable with it. And he thinks, like Prabhupada explains in the purport, therefore Arjuna wants to say, what is the use of such a waste of time? Arjuna experienced in the 11th chapter that to be attached to the personal form of Krishna is best, because he could thus understand all other forms at the same time, and there was no disturbance to his love for Krishna. So you see, concentrating on the impersonal form of the Lord actually caused disturbance to Arjuna. He was losing his balance, as it was explained earlier. So Arjuna is just wondering, so what is, why are people even indulging in, learning about, or, engaging in that kind of impersonal philosophy for the Lord? So we'll move on. So this is the backdrop. So his question is, who is perfect? Let's read the verse and the purport, and I mean the translation, the purport by Prabhupada. Arjuna vacha evam satata yukta ye bhaktastvām paryupasate ye chapyaksharam avyaktam tesham ke yoga vittamaha. Arjuna inquired, which are considered to be more perfect, those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested? Now, Arjuna is trying to settle the question of which process is easier and which of the classes is most perfect. In other words, he's clarifying his own position because he's attached to the personal form of Krishna. He's not attached to the impersonal Brahman. He wants to know whether his position is secure. So, as we were just discussing in the previous chapter, Arjuna is bewildered with the universal form of the Lord. And now he is a little, confused as to what is a better way to worship the Lord. Should we go the impersonal route, or should or should we go the personal route? So, this is the question Arjuna has in his mind, and he's posing this question to Krishna. As we've seen so far, the bulk of the Bhagavad Gita is questions from Arjuna and answers from Krishna. So, this is a very common inquiry process in the Vedic system. We also see that the Srimad Bhagavatam is a series of questions and answers by various devotees there. So this is a very common and format which is there in all our Vedic system. And why this is appreciated is because this helps us to think and also contemplate on the actual problems of life. If it were just an essay without any questions, it may not make us think this much. But when we see the questions posed by Arjuna, we are like, okay, maybe there are situations which I'm going through which are similar to this, and maybe I have these same questions, and and I can find some answers here. So this is what Arjuna, most of the chapters we see Arjuna is starting off with a question, and it is purely for our benefit that it is in this format that it helps us to understand. So we see Arjuna's question here is that which is considered to be more perfect, the people who are engaged in the impersonal worship of the impersonal Brahman, or the devotional service, or the bhakti yogis. So we'll see what happens next. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. So this is the answer. Maya Veshyamano ye mam nitya yukta upasate shraddhaya parayopetah te me yukta tamamatah. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, those who fix their minds on my personal form, that's Krishna's personal form, and are always engaged in worshipping me, Krishna, with great and transcendental faith, are considered by me to be most perfect. In answer to Arjuna's question, Krishna clearly says that he who concentrates upon his personal form and who worships him with faith and devotion is to be considered more perfect in yoga. For one in such Krishna consciousness, there are no material activities because everything is done for Krishna. A pure devotee is constantly engaged. So we have seen elsewhere also that Srila Prabhupada, he describes that there are actually three levels of realization of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The first level is the Brahman level, the second is the Paramatma level, and the third is the Bhagavan aspect. So those who are in worshipping in devotional service or bhakti yoga, they actually are situated in the third level of realization, which is the Bhagavan. So that is Sat, Chit, and Ananda. They have a complete understanding of the Sat, the eternity, Chit, knowledge, and Ananda, the bliss, all the three potencies of the Lord. So they're in complete knowledge of that. But The other stages, which are the Brahman and the Paramatma, they may not have a knowledge of the personal form of the Lord. For example, like Srila Prabhupada explains elsewhere that practitioners or transcendentalists who are in the Brahman realization of the Lord, they are very familiar with the concept that I'm not the body, but I am the spirit soul. So that is what they are very well fixed in that concept that they're not the body. So they have come to some level of transcendental realization that they're not this body, but they're the spirit soul. But then they associate all their problems and their miseries with the body, and they feel that the best way would be to totally do away with this bodily conception of life. So they try to aim for the destination of the impersonal Brahman. So they think that the personal form is a source of all miseries, and they don't want to go anywhere near that. So their destination or their aim is to go totally impersonal and merge into the impersonal Brahma Jyoti. And then the second level of realization, where we saw the Paramatma level, this actually discusses about the practitioners who are called generally yogis, who are meditating on the four-handed form of the Supreme Lord. And these practitioners, we will see in the next few verses as to what will be their destination when they are kind of reaching their if when they are totally reaching the what do I say, when they're at the peak of their practice. So what is their destination, we will just see in the next few verses. So Prabhupada has explained these all, and we've learned all this in the previous chapters, that about these three stages of realization. But here clearly Krishna says that those who fix their minds on my personal form and are always engaged in worshipping me, that is bhakti yoga, with a great and transcendental faith, are considered to be most perfect. So that is what is actually being told by Lord Krishna here. So yukta tama teme yukta tama mataha. So that means they are the most perfect. So that's what Krishna is explaining here. We'll move on to see what other explanations Krishna is giving. And next, he tries to explain this. Generally, when we try to prove a point, we also want to prove why something else is not the answer, but this is the solution, right? So Krishna is trying to explain what is the process and destination for somebody who is not engaged in the personal worship of the Lord, or who's not engaged in the in the bhakti yoga process. So these two verses, verses 3 and 4, they discuss the other kind of transcendentalists who are worshippers of the impersonal form of the Lord. So this is the verse. This is a combined verse, and 3 and 4 together. So we will see what Krishna says here. Ye tvaksharamanirdesyam avyaktam paryupasate sarvatragam achintyam cha कूटस्थम अचलम ध्रुवम सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामं सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति मामेव सर्वभूतहिते रताः. The meaning: but those who fully worship the unmanifested, yet paksharam anirdeshyam, which is beyond sense perception and indefinite, all pervading, sarvatragam, achintyam, inconceivable, unchanging, guthastam, fixed, unchanging is fixed is achalam, and dhruvam, immovable. By the process, so those who worship the unmanifested, which is beyond self-perception, indefinite, all-pervading. So this is the impersonal aspect of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's unmanifested, he is pervading everywhere, he is unconceivable, unchanging, fixed, and immovable. So these are the impersonal aspects of the Supreme Lord. By the process of controlling various senses, how are they worshipping this impersonal form of the Supreme Lord? what is the process? By the process of controlling various senses, being equally disposed to everyone. Such persons at last achieve me, being engaged in the welfare of all. So this is what Krishna is saying here. So these practitioners, like we saw, the jnanis or the yogis, they are engaged in the worship of the impersonal Brahman. And but this process we have already seen in the chapter 6, where dhyana yoga is discussed in so many details. Like there are so many steps to ashtanga yoga, and how difficult those steps are. For years together one has to practice self-control, control of mind, restraint of mind. And after so many years of practice, he may enter into this dhyana, on the Supreme Lord, where he is actually able to obviate all the surrounding surrounding distractions around him, and able to concentrate on the four-handed form of the Lord. So generally, these yogis who practice this form, of worship, it's a very difficult process. It's not an easy process, like how so it takes lifetimes after. I mean, it takes so many years. Like we know from other ages where uh, you know, meditation on the Supreme Lord was considered one of the processes to reach him. But this was way back, in Satya Yuga. So we cannot find that kind of concentration or that kind of, determination to actually sit down in that kind of a meditation practice in Kali Yuga. It's not really applicable to our age and time in that sense, because our attention spans are short, very very short, so to speak. And we are not at that level of higher consciousness that we can adapt to that practice. So we have seen all this in chapter 6, where Arjuna himself asks this process is so difficult, of controlling the mind. It is so difficult. It's like I mean, he discusses so many details in chapter 6 about how difficult it is to control the mind. And that's what Srila Prabhupada is also kind of alluding to here, when he says that such persons at last achieve me, like it's not an easy process. So there could be many deviations on the path. They could fall off from the path, um, and and may lose the actual purpose of attaining Krishna. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada further explains that a person, after so much of penance, a lot of penance and meditation, when he finally surrenders to the Lord, then he actually reaches this destination. So what does that at last achieve me means? Even such a person who's involved in meditation, deep meditation or dhyana yoga, unless he takes finally to the surrender of the Lord and accepting Krishna's personal form, he cannot achieve me. That's what Srila Prabhupada explains, that this is imperative, this sentence is imperative to the fact that a person must surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and realize his personal aspect. And that's when they can reach. Otherwise, they will be deviated from this path, and they may max reach the impersonal Brahma Jyoti, but to attain the planet of the Supreme Lord, they have to surrender unto the Supreme Lord. So this is what is actually explained in this process 3 and 4. And we also will see in the next verse why this process is so difficult, troublesome path of the impersonalists. क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्तचेतसाम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखं देहवद्भिरवाप्यते. For those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. So, for a devotee, there is no difficulty in approaching the Supreme immediately and directly, but for those who are following the impersonal way to spiritual realization, the path is difficult. So, here Krishna is reiterating the fact that why it is so difficult for the impersonalists to, make progress in this path of God realization, is because, we are in a human form, and it is easy for us to relate to, the deity form of the Lord. The Lord actually, he comes down, and allows service to be done to him in this form of the Archa Vigraha, which is equally potent as the Supreme Lord himself. And we can offer service to the Supreme Lord in a very personal way. Like we have our deities at our home, we have our deities at the temple. So the Lord very mercifully, he actually manifests himself in this deity forms. And Prabhupada actually brings this point in the purport that these deity forms of worship, the worship of these deity forms, is not idol worship. It is definitely not idol worship. And he gives an analogy to further explain why this is not an idol worship. So as we can see, there's a picture of a mailbox here. So when we put a mail in a mailbox, actually, in India, you have, this is, I don't know if this system is here in US, but in India, you have these red color mailboxes, where you put the mail, and the mailman comes and picks it like every morning and evening, or some set timings of the day. And, he will deliver it to the person who it is addressed to. So when you put your mail in such a mailbox, you're confident that it is going to reach, the other person to whom it is addressed to. But can we put our mail in any box, any red colored box, and then expect that it will reach the person? No, right? Because that is not an authorized form of, mail system. So only where there is an authorized mailbox can we put the mail in and expect that it will reach, the destination where it is addressed to. Similarly, the Lord very mercifully, he takes he manifests in this Archa Vigrahas, or the deity form of the Lord, and allows us to serve him. So the service when we do to the deities, we have to do with the consciousness that it is actually going to be reaching the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. Pure devotees who are engaged in devotional service, uh, we have heard several accounts where these devotees actually have had personal interactions with the Lord, like they have experienced reciprocation from the Lord. And when they make prasadam and offer, they get some signs. And we have also several anecdotal pastimes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where there's a small devotee boy whose father is away, and he tells him to make an offering to the Lord. And when the father comes back, this boy says that the Lord ate up everything, and the father finds it very hard to believe. What are you saying? The Lord came and ate up everything? That cannot be true. So then the next day also, this boy makes the offering, and he says, the Lord ate up everything. And then his dad gets suspicious, and then he's like, let me see really if the Lord is coming and eating up everything. So the little boy, in all his innocence, he actually offers with so much love to the Lord that the Lord actually comes and partakes of the offering, the bhoga, to him. And then his dad is like surprised when he sees that this is really happening. And he's like, oh my God, my son is a great devotee. The Lord is just coming and he's eating all the bhoga there. So that is amazing. So we do hear of such reciprocal pastimes of the Lord with his devotees. And on contemporary times too, there are several such pastimes which Pankajangri Prabhu and Janivas Prabhu have shared in a small booklet, like how they have been reciprocations from the Lord himself, with the devotees. So earlier also we saw that, the Lord, he is actually, there's a verse which says that the Lord shows special mercy or partiality to his devotees. And then Prabhupada actually qualifies the statement in the purport and says that this is not showing partiality. The Lord is equal to everybody, but yes, he engages in reciprocality with his devotees, because the devotees take one step, he takes 1,000 steps towards them. So that's how kind and merciful the Lord is. So yes, he shows his mercy to everybody, but then to devotees, because they are approaching him with so much love, there is reciprocal relationship, because he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead is ultimately a person, and he has the different rasas, the different emotions, and we can engage in the service of the Lord and enjoy with him in these different emotions, which are a very blissful aspect of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So for a devotee, when we try to associate with this deity form of the Lord, it is not very difficult, because we ourselves have like the Bible says, man is created in the image of the Lord. So we have this two-handed form, and when Arjuna, when he saw the universal form of the Lord, he was so bewildered, and he immediately wanted to see the original form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we are able to relate better, and also we are able to offer service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in a very personal relationship. So that's why Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that this is an easier path, because we are able to relate very well to this. But however, the transcendentalists who are situated in the impersonal aspect of the Lord, they find it very difficult, because most of the time they're speculating, what could this be, what could this not be, I mean, they think that the energy is superior to the energetic, wherein the common sense says that energy comes from the energetic, right? But they're bewildered, because they think that the energetic comes from the energy. So they are in that bewildered state, and it is difficult for them to realize the actual conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they only have a partial realization because of this concept of impersonalism. So that is why it is a very troublesome path for the impersonalists. And also we'll see that why it is troublesome will be explained in further detail in the next few verses also. Okay. Again, now Krishna, he goes back to bhakti, ananya bhakti. So it is non-motivated, undeviated bhakti, ananya bhakti, the simple and easy path of personalism. Okay. The verse goes as follows. Ye tu sarvani karmani mai sanyasya matparaha ananyenaiva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate. But for those who give up all their activities unto me, being devoted to me without deviation, engaged in devotional service, and always meditating on me and worshipping me, तेषामहं समुद्धर्ता मृत्युसंसारसागरात् भवामि न चिरात् पार्थ मय्यावेशितचेतसाम्. For them, I, that's Krishna, am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. I, that's Krishna, deliver them quickly, O son of Pratha, because they fix their minds upon me. That's Krishna. So here, Lord Krishna very clearly, he again establishes this fact that those who are engaged in devotional service without any kind of deviation and motivation, they are engaged in devotional service to the Lord, and and who meditate on his personal form and they worship him, that is, they are offering devotional service, the Lord actually delivers them from this mrityu samsara, like the samsara, or this ocean of um, um, uh, birth and death, from the cycle of birth and death here. So he samsara sagarat is the ocean, and samsara mrityu samsara sagarat. So from the ocean of birth and death, he actually delivers this the devotees, because they are nitya yukta, because they are always engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, because they fix their minds upon Krishna. So let's see what Srila Prabhupada has to say in this purport. Now my internet. Okay. Okay, this part of the purport I wanted to, just bring your attention to. The purport of this verse is that a devotee does not need to practice Ashtanga Yoga in order to transfer his soul to the spiritual planets. The responsibility is taken by the Supreme Lord Himself. He clearly states here that He Himself becomes the deliverer. A child is completely cared for by his parents. So Srila Prabhupada is giving the analogy of the child and the parents, and thus his position is secure. Similarly, a devotee does not need to endeavor to transfer himself by yoga practice to other planets. Rather, the Supreme Lord, by his great mercy, comes at once, riding on his bird carrier Garuda, and at once delivers the devotee from material existence. Although a man who has fallen in the ocean may struggle very hard and may be very expert in swimming, he cannot save himself. But if someone comes and picks him up from the water, then he is easily rescued. Similarly, the Lord picks up the devotee from this material existence. One simply has to practice the easy process of Krishna consciousness and fully engage himself in devotional service. So this is what Srila Prabhupada actually explains in the purport, that a devotee, he need not take to these difficult processes, of trying to concentrate the mind and engaging in so many different ashtanga postures, trying to do yama, niyama, and all those different postures and all the different steps, which we saw earlier in ashtanga yoga. So he need not go through all these difficult things, because as we practice devotional service, all these this jnana and all the siddhis come naturally to devotees. So he says the Lord actually takes care of arranging for all these kind of things for the devotee. Just like how a child, a small child, the parents care for the child has no worry. He knows that mom is going to feed him or her at the right time, and dad is going to take him for a drive or whatever that is. So he's very confident that his parents are there taking care of him or her. So he doesn't care for anything. He has a very free mind. Similarly, a devotee who knows that, who is surrendered unto the Supreme Lord, he's very sure of the fact that the Supreme Lord will actually take care of his needs, and he can totally concentrate on the process of devotional service. So he does not worry about these different difficult postures and stuff. I just remember Srila Prabhupada saying once in a class that for the Hare Krishna, devotees, the best form of exercise or asana would be, just chanting and dancing. So that is a great exercise which will actually recharge the devotees, or rejuvenate the devotees and give them more energy. So we did not have to, specifically engage ourselves in any kind of these difficult meditative practices or difficult yogasanas or things like that to realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because the Lord Himself takes care of the progress of the devotee. So Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayajata Janayatyasu Vairagyanam Chayat Ahetukam. So he gives this jnana and this vairagya, everything is given to the devotee, whoever is engaged, Vasudeve Bhagavati, in the service of the Supreme Lord. So that's what he says in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we don't have to go through a separate process per se to realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the easiest process, which Srila Prabhupada further describes in the purport, is by the chanting of the Mahamantra. It's as simple as that. Just chant and be happy, like how Srila Prabhupada says. Simply by chanting the holy name of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, A devotee of the Lord can approach the supreme destination easily and happily, but this destination cannot be approached by any other process of religion. So, this is what Srila Prabhupada so beautifully explains in the purport as to why devotional service is so easy, is because the Lord takes over, the reins of the chariot, of the mind of the devotee, and we don't have to do much. Like how like Srila Prabhupada elsewhere also gives this example of how the dog of a millionaire, he enjoys all the comforts that the millionaire also enjoys. He goes in the same car as the millionaire, and he gets the same respect, he gets good food and everything. So all he has to do is serve his master. And then he is totally set, because the master takes care of his needs. So similarly, for devotees, Krishna himself takes care of all our needs. That's what is explained by Srila Prabhupada in these verses. For them, I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. So we need not go through these difficult practices. And this is a nice picture Radhika Mataji put there, explaining the purport that Srila Prabhupada actually is explaining the purport. Okay, we'll move on to the next section. So in the next section, Lord Krishna actually details the different stages or levels of bhakti yoga and the other yogas. So that's what we'll be seeing, like what is the process for an advanced devotee, what is the process for somebody who's just starting out, like a sadhaka. So all these are explained in the other in these following verses from 8 through the remaining chapter. So devotion, so 8 through 10 verses, they discuss somebody who's on a spontaneous platform, or who is very fixed in his determination of devotional service. And also it discusses somebody who may not be that fixed, but is following the principles of Vaidhi Bhakti, or regulated practice of devotional service. So let's see what that is about. So in 12.8, Lord Krishna says, just fix. So these are like a series of steps he goes through. If this works, do this. If this does not, then, like you have, I don't know how many you are familiar with programming, but in programming, there is this concept of if, then, else, if else statements, where you say if something, else if something, else if something, else if, and else something, like that. So similarly, Krishna goes through different conditional statements, so to speak, where different levels of devotees in transcendentalists and devotional service are described. So 12.8, just fix your mind upon me, the supreme personality of Godhead, and engage all your intelligence in me. Thus you will live in me always without a doubt. So in this, Krishna is explaining about the position of a very pure devotee of the Lord. So we have, Srila Prabhupada, who could see Krishna in everything and everywhere. All his 24/7, he was engaged in the service of the Lord. So even if we see his biography, Srila Prabhupada's biography, he hardly slept for a couple of hours, and he would engage in translating the books of the Lord, and giving lectures, or doing the transcript seva on the dictaphone, or giving classes, or teaching devotees something. So he was always 24/7 engaged in the service of the supreme personality of Godhead. So these advanced devotees who are very fixed in the supreme personality of the Lord, they don't have any problem, so to speak. They will always be live in me. What Krishna actually means by that is they'll be always in sync with the thoughts of the supreme personality of Godhead. So they exactly know what pleases the supreme Lord, and they know how to serve the Lord very beautifully. So they don't have a problem. But the next step, where Krishna says, my dear Arjuna, or winner of wealth, if you cannot fix your mind upon me without deviation, then follow the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga. In this way, develop a desire to attain me. So this is the next step of Bhakti Yoga. This person is also interested, in following the path of Bhakti Yoga, but still he's not in that advanced stage where he is, totally able to serve the Lord without any deviation and motivation. So practitioners, this is referring to the sadhakas. So the general route recommended for such practitioners is to take shelter of a guru, and under the guidance of the guru and the devotees, try to serve the devotees and the Lord and the guru. So that way they will attain a desire. As we serve the guru will give us the enlightenment, and also how the way how we can actually worship the Lord, with our wholehearted attention and wholehearted uh, with all our intelligence fixed on the Lord, like which is worship, which is expressed in verse 12.8. So the guru will help us and guide us to reach that stage of um, bhakti, or that stage of practice where we're able to uh, worship and do devotional service to the Lord without any deviation or motivation. So in the beginning, we may just be thinking, okay, my guru has told me I have to chant 16 rounds, I have to do this, I have to follow the 4 regulative principles, I need to wake up early and do so. But as we keep doing this over the time, what happens is this becomes a second nature to us, and we develop that taste. So by the mercy of the guru, actually this knowledge will be um, um, actually shown in our heart, by the Paramatma too. And this knowledge is given to us, and we advance in our Bhakti Yoga. So what Krishna says is, so when you're not on that highest platform of spontaneous devotion, at least engage in Vaidhi Bhakti, or become a sadhaka and practice the rules and regulations and the principles laid out by the Guru. So, and if you're still not able to do this, some people are not able to chant 16 rounds, take diksha, and follow regulative principles and things like that, but still they want to do, they still believe a lot, in Bhakti Yoga. So, what he says is the next step is you just work for Krishna. So, if you're not able to do such things, what you can do is, you just work and then give the whatever Lakshmi you can donate for Krishna conscious activities. So different examples I have given here, like sometimes there is this Bhadra Purnima marathon, where we distribute so many Bhagavad Gitas or Srimad Bhagavatam sets or Chaitanya Charitamrita and thing like that. And you can also donate to the noble cause, to the spiritual cause, not a noble cause, the spiritual cause of temple constructions, or helping out devotees. They may be devotees in distress, who may be in need of Lakshmi, or who may be in need of some facilities or things like that. And if you have a big house, you can perhaps arrange for them to stay there, or give Lakshmi, so that it can alleviate um, their problems. So this is another way, indirectly, where you can work for Krishna, though you may not be directly doing like the sadhana bhakti, or the higher stage of bhava bhakti. So still in this way, by serving devotees, you still still on that path of Bhakti Yoga. So these 3 stages are described from 12.8 to 12.10 for devotees who are in different stages of Bhakti Yoga. And further going down, let's see what Krishna says. And he discusses karma, jnana, and dhyana in verses 11 through 12. Okay. So if you're not able to do this, if you're still not, sometimes you're not allowed to donate, to the temple. Sometimes there are restrictions people face. They're not able to eat prasadam at home because the family members may not be very much in very conducive to this practice of bhakti yoga or offering to the Lord. And so some devotees may face that kind of problems too, which we don't know. Like there are so many problems that people face in devotional life. So what is the way out for those kind of people? Then Lord Krishna says, 12:11, if however you're unable to work in this consciousness of me, then try, oh my God, okay, I'm running out of time. Then try to act, giving up all results of your work, and try to be self-situated. So this is that other stage, where he says that you give in charity. or you perform yagnas, like, in one sense, engage in karma yoga kind of practice, where you are, not necessarily giving in charity to devotees, or, not necessarily engaging in, devotional practices or service of the Lord or temple donations or things like that, but at least follow the rules and regulations of karma yoga. Give some charity, like to some needy poor people, do some annadan, or build some hospital or things like that, or do some yajnas for the welfare of everybody. So if you're not able to do that, what he says, Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasa jnana dhyanam vishishyate dhyanat karma phalatyaga tyaga chantiranantaram. If you cannot take to this practice, then engage yourself in the cultivation of knowledge. So he is now referring to jnana yoga. Better than knowledge, however, is meditation, and better than meditation is renunciation of the fruits of action, for by such renunciation one can attain peace of mind. So he says, if you are not able to do such things, at least engage in jnana, or the cultivation of knowledge. But then he says, dhyana, that is meditative practice, is much better than jnana. But what is the basis for these two practices? The ultimate basis must be renunciation of fruits. If we should not, if supposing a person is engaged, like we had discussed earlier, a transcendentalist, impersonal transcendentalist may be engaged in meditative practices, and he may attain some siddha, siddha yogis, like they say, some various different kinds of mystic powers. Some people can walk on water, some people can like do different kinds, like mentally transfer themselves, to some other plane, things like this. Yogis do achieve all these benefits. So if you engage in this process of jnana, and jnana, generally the transcendentalists, they believe that they believe in serving the common people, and feel that that is the end aim of the impersonalist philosophy of the Supreme Lord. So they believe in serving the needy, the poor, and things like that. So, but what could happen is there could be some kind of selfishness again in their heart, for some name or fame or recognition, that they're doing these things. And then the dhyana process too, like I explained earlier, the person engaged in dhyana may be looking out for some kind of a mystic power, something like, supposing, say, I want to be able to walk on water, I want to be able to walk on air, things like that. So those powers can be achieved by these processes. So if a person is deviated, from this path, the actual aim of jnana and dhyana must be to realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrender unto Him. But if we get distracted and we go towards the fruits, that is, getting some mystic power, getting some fame and recognition and things like that, what happens? These processes make no sense, right? So he says, better than meditation, of course, is the renunciation of the fruits of action, for by such renunciation one can attain peace of mind. So unless you're in this renounced mood, that you're not after these fruits of all these jnana and dhyana practices and karma practices, that I want to become rich and opulent, let me perform this yajna, I want to have a big home or get a great job or something like that, and I will perform this yajna. So if our mind is fixed on those kind of fruitive mentality, then this actually will not take us closer to Krishna. So that's why Krishna says uh, this should be actually culminate in the renunciation of the fruits of action, for by such renunciation one can attain peace of mind. So this renunciation of fruits, that's why I made it a little larger in size. This is very important to this process of karma, jnana, and dhyana. So we see how, if a person is not engaged, he should follow these practices and at the same time cultivate the habit of renouncing things. Next, Krishna discusses the transcendental qualities of pure devotees, what nice qualities they have. Of course, there are so many verses which say that the devotees who are engaged in the worship of the Supreme Lord also acquire these same divine qualities. So let's see one by one what it is. Adveshta sarvabhutanam maitrah karuna evacha nirmamo nirahankara samadukha sukhakshami santushta satatam yogi yatatma drida nishchayah mayarpita mano buddhir yo me bhakta same priyah. One who is not envious but is a kind friend to all living entities, who does not think himself a proprietor and is free from false ego, who is equal in both happiness and distress, who is tolerant, always satisfied, self controlled, and engaged in devotional service with determination, his mind and intelligence fixed on me. Such a devotee of mine is very dear to Krishna. The me, mine, everything. Here, this refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Okay, so one who is not envious but a kind friend to all living entities. I just put a picture of, Dhritarashtra there. So Prabhupada explains in one of the purports that Dhritarashtra was very envious, when his brother Pandu passed away, he seized the opportunity. He thought this is the great opportunity for me to become, for me or my son to become the king, and he wanted to deprive the Pandavas of any kingdomship. So he actually supported his son Duryodhana. And Prabhupada also describes that he was not only physically blind, but spiritually blind too. So he did not follow this actual process of dharma, and he was supporting his son because of this underlying nature of his the quality of enviousness, the quality of envy which he had towards the Pandavas, that he wanted his son, to actually become the king. So he supported Duryodhana in all these activities, trying to banish the Pandavas and trying to kill them in so many different ways. So he was aware of all this, and he supported because of this one quality of envy, which he had. But a devotee, he is non-envious in nature, and he's a friend to all the living entities. So we have several examples of such devotees who are non-envious. We also see the picture of Prahlada Maharaj, who actually exhibited all these qualities of a pure devotee. He was very kind, he was very soft spoken. Even though his father tried to kill him so many times, he only asked the Supreme Lord to actually correct his father from his path. So this quality of Prahlad Maharaj, was uh, I mean, he had all these qualities which are mentioned, like he was self-satisfied. He did not fret or get scared, when he was put into those different trials and tribulations. And he was always concentrating, engaged on the Supreme Personality of his mind, was always engaged in the meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is, Prahlad Maharaj is a great example of such a devotee. 12:15, he by whom no one is put into difficulty and who is not disturbed by anyone, who is equipoised in happiness and distress, fear and anxiety, is very dear to me. So again, Prahlad Maharaj, when he was put into so many difficult circumstances, he was still equipoised, because he was always concentrating on the meditation of the holy name. So he did not have this kind of anxiety or distress or fear, and he's so dear to the Lord. Why is he dear? We see from the Narsimha pastime, when Narsimha took that Ugra form, all the demigods were scared. In fact, Lakshmi Mata was scared to approach him, because he was in that Ugra form after killing Hiranyakashipu. But Prahlad Maharaj was the only person who could approach the Lord, and the Lord very sweetly took him on his lap, So that's how dear devotees are to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 12:16, my devotee is not dependent on the ordinary course of activities, who is a pure expert, without cares, free from all pains, and not striving for some result, is very dear to me. So we see here, I have put a picture of Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. So these Goswamis were so renounced. They were not into these ordinary activities, they were actually holding very high positions in the Muslim government, but they gave up everything. Tyaktva Turnam Ashesha Mandalapati. There's a very beautiful verse in the Sad Goswami Ashtakam, which actually describes their renunciant nature. They gave up everything. practically everything. Even the money which Sanatana Goswami had, he just gave it off to his servant. He said, I don't need all this. You just take this and, leave me. I just want to go to the Lord. So they were not into this plan making business, oh, today I want to study well maybe, and tomorrow get a great job, and day after I want to have like a big palatial house and get married nicely and save well for my retirement, like how Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, idam adhyamaya labdam yamam prapsya manoratham. Like he says that today the plan making business, generally we are all engaged in. So these great devotees of the Lord, they're totally surrendered to the Lord. And so they don't, they're not looking for these kind of insurance policies or assurance policies, and they're completely dependent on they're completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord, and they're very sure that the Lord, whatever situation the Lord puts them in, that is the best situation for them. So they're not striving for all this normal day-to-day things which people generally go through. They're not dependent on this ordinary course of activities. So they are always fixed in Krishna's service. And so they are pure, expert, without cares, free from all pain, and not striving for some result. So naturally, Krishna gives them the intelligence because they are, always engaged in their service. So they're naturally intelligent, they're naturally attractive, and they don't have a care because they're totally surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these great devotees are examples of such qualities. Let's move on. Yo na hrishyati na dveshti na shochati na kankshati. One who neither rejoices nor grieves, who neither laments nor desires, and who renounces both auspicious and inauspicious things. Such a devotee is very dear to me. So this is in the platform of an avadhuta, who actually renounces pretty much everything. And we have a picture of Jadavarta there. He was, like the name says, Jadavarta. He did not care for the social norms or customs or things like that. He just was in his own mind frame. He did not want to be disturbed by anybody else. So he took to very unconventional, uncommon practices, which people, when they looked, would kind of throw them off. So when he was actually bearing this palanquin of, the king, he was just walking and trying not to step over the ants and, not to harm them. The king was very angry that, why is he rocking this palanquin? And he spoke harsh words to him. But that's when the king got the mercy from him, when he actually he educated the king in the knowledge of the spiritual science, and then the king realized what a great personality this Jadabharta is. So these devotees of the Lord, they are very far from these normal social conventions, and they're in a different realm altogether. One who is equal to friends and enemies, who's equipoised in honor and dishonor, heat and cold, happiness and distress, fame and infamy, who is always free from contaminating association, always silent and satisfied with anything, who doesn't care for any residence, who's fixed in knowledge, and who's engaged in devotional service. Such a person is very dear to me. So here we have a picture of the great Haridas Thakur, the Namacharya. So he was beaten, in the marketplace so many times, but still, he never bore grudge against anybody. He forgave everybody. There was also a prostitute sent to distract him, but what happened? The prostitute was converted to a devotee. So this is the effect of the pure devotee of the Lord. Whoever goes in the association of the pure devotee of the Lord, they cannot do harm to the devotee. On the contrary, they will actually benefit from the association of such a devotee, because these devotees are totally invested in the service of the Supreme Lord, and because of such because of their devotional practices, they acquire all these qualities of tolerance and being equipoised in honor and dishonor, and they are oblivious to all these material conditions around them, and they can actually give this bhakti to other persons who are also coming in close association with them. So that is the power of devotees. They are able to not only withstand any kind of material dualities, but at the same time they're able to give release or relief from these material dualities to persons who come in the association. And one such example is Haridas Thakur. We have so many examples, all in our scriptures. I'm just rushing. I don't want to. It's a small chapter, so to speak. I was thinking I may complete it before time, but yeah. Next, moving on to the last verse. ये तु धर्मामृतमिदं यथोक्तं पर्युपासते श्रद्धाना मत्परमा भक्तास्ते तेतीव मे प्रियाः. Those who follow this imperishable path of devotional service and who completely engage themselves with faith make me, that's Krishna, the supreme goal, are very, very dear to me. That's Krishna. So they are very dear to Krishna. So that's what is the concluding verse of this chapter, who says that those who follow this path of devotional service and who engage themselves with faith, in this practice of bhakti, for them the supreme goal is easily attainable. Srila Prabhupada, he explains in the purport that the start of this kind of a devotional practice is generally by the association of a devotee, right? We are introduced to the devotional practices. Generally, this happens through the association of devotees. I just would want to read an excerpt from the purport. Um, um, okay. In this chapter, it is decided that through good association, one develops attachment for pure devotional service and thereby accepts a bona fide spiritual master, and from him begins to hear and chant and observe the regulative principles of devotional service with faith, attachment, and devotion, and thus becomes engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. So this is in essence the whole message of this whole chapter which Srila Prabhupada gives in the purport. This path is recommended in this chapter. Therefore, there is no doubt that devotional service is the only absolute path for self-realization, for the attainment of Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it is very clearly, Srila Prabhupada explains in this last verse in the purport that the first step would be association of devotees, and the perfect example for this is Sri Narada Muni. We see this picture of Narada Muni, the little boy, when he was very young. His mother, she offered services to the sages who would, be there in the forest, who would come and she would serve them. She used to cook for them and take care of the sages. So Narada Muni, he got this association of the sages. And one day his mother passed away. And so because of this association, of sages and serving and eating the remnants of these sages, Narada Muni actually developed this process, this taste for bhakti yoga. And then he traveled and meditated and did so many things and to actually realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he attained this transcendental status of this transcendental spaceman, so to speak, who can travel anywhere in this in these three worlds actually. So he got this status after, but the first seed was sown by devotional service and in association of these sages you see in the pictures. So his mother was doing service and he was eating the remnants, from the prasadam, the maha of all these sages, and he got attracted to devotional service. So that's how he actually, went back to, in one sense, went back to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or he became a transcendental spaceman. So that's how he perfected his life. So we see that this association is very important. Lavamatra sadhu sangha, as they say, is very important to first kick off this process of devotional service. So that's what Srila Prabhupada is explaining, that we should actually aspire for association of such great personalities so that we can actually go ahead in our path of devotional service. So this is the end. And before we end this chapter here, there's a brief summary. The first part of the chapter deals with Arjuna's inquiry: who's better transcendentalist? Is it the personalist or the impersonalist? So who is better? And the answer was given by Krishna himself. Okay, that the personalist, or a person engaged in devotional service, is much better situated. He's very dear to the Lord. Personalist will, and then from 2 to 7, the verses, uh, Lord Krishna explains, how the personalists are better than the impersonalists, and how the devotional service to the Lord is very superior in nature. And 8 to 12, we saw the different stages of bhakti, and who was not able to do bhakti, who can take to the other practices. And 13 to 20, we saw what are the devotional or the sweet qualities of devotees, who have engaged themselves in the service of the Supreme Lord. So we've come to the end of this discussion today, and I would like to stop here. And thank you so much. And if I made any mistakes, please feel free to correct me. And thank you so much for this opportunity. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Mataji's. What is the next step, Mataji's? Vinita?
To end the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Moksha. So if nobody has any questions or comments, we'll just give 2 minutes for devotees to gather their thoughts, and if they have any questions. So otherwise, like Moksha suggested, we will just end the call here. So we'll just take a couple of minutes, if devotees want to come up with some thoughts or comments, and then we'll
Mataji, such a beautiful class. So many nice examples about pure devotional service. Narada Muni, Prahlada Maharaj, and wonderful, wonderful summary, Mataji. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mataji. Just following in your footsteps.
No, Mataji, you are amazing. Yeah, I like the way how you gave that example of else, if else, and finally, yeah, that's so nice. The step-by-step thing of what Krishna says.
Yeah, I just felt that, Krishna also presents logic, and it's so scientific, right? I mean, the whole presentation of Bhagavad Gita is not
Right.
just there that, we just imagine something and just accept something. It's so logical and so nicely presented by Krishna.
Yeah. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you, Mata.
Anybody has any questions or comments for Mataji? Please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Mataji, Dandavat Pranams, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Mataji, such a nice summary, Mataji. Really enjoyed the whole class, the whole session. It was just flowing like a nectar. I loved all the examples for the various purports, and it was so easy to follow along, and it was making so much of sense after your practical, some of them were so practical examples that we could apply, and it made so much sense, and the flow was great, Mataji. Thank you for making it easy for us to understand Krishna's message. Hare Krishna.
Thanks, Radhika. It was the examples, everything were given by you. So thanks to you, actually.
Mataji, no, you are very humble, Mataji. I just know what I did. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Radhika.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Lakshmi Mataji.
Thank you so much, Mataji. It was such a wonderful class. Actually, it's a very small chapter. So when we read in Gita, we think we can understand it. It will be very simple. But after listening to a class, we know how much it is important to hear the class before reading Gita, the chapter, because you explained it so well. Mataji, I have a few questions.
I'll try, Mataji. There are other experts who may answer better, but yeah, I'll try my best.
Those are very simple questions, Mataji. Beginner questions. Mataji, starting with Arjun's question, you said that Arjun was bewildered seeing the universal form, but you mentioned that it was like an impersonal concept. But the form, it was a form, right? It had so many hands. Then Krishna showed the 4-hand form. Then the to and form. So how do we say the universal form is an impersonal form? It had a form, right? It had so many features in it.
Yeah, like you rightly said, the impersonal form had so many mouths, so many arms, so many legs. So that is not a normal personal form, right? A personal form is a two-handed form of the Lord. And this impersonal form of the Lord, which is the Virata Rupa, which we saw in the previous chapter, is actually manifested for a certain period of time. It's not an eternal form of the Lord. It is like this is not a eternal Vaikuntha form of the Lord. The Lord just manifests this Virat Rupa for for just some fraction of a time there. So this is not an eternal form of the Lord, so to speak, and it's not personal in the sense that it has just so many mouths, so many eyes, so many heads, so many arms, so many legs. So that is not the conception of a personal form. So this is the explanation Srila Prabhupada gives, that this is a temporary form. That's what he explains in the Srimad Bhagavatam, I think is the second canto. He says that this is a temporary form, and that's why it is impersonal in that sense. And it's not a two-handed form, the normal form which we see, the personal form. So that's why it's considered impersonal. If anybody else wants to add something, please feel free. But this is what I gathered from Srila Prabhupada's explanation.
Okay, Mataji, so I'm trying to understand that we have to concentrate on the eternal form, not the temporary form which comes and goes like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. And next question, one more question, Mataji. In the text 3 and 4, there was a last, in the translation, there was a last line which says, being engaged in the welfare of all. I didn't understand that.
Yeah, so impersonalists, like I said, they are of the concept that Manava Seva is Madhava Seva. They believe in because the impersonalists, they don't have this concept of the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they reach such levels of renunciation, and then they don't know what to do at that level, and then they think, Srila Prabhupada explains, and then they think that the ultimate goal is to serve everybody, and that is the way to attain bliss or happiness, is by serving, because they are so renounced in their practices, and they feel that being renounced means serving everybody around them, being engaged in the welfare of all. So they take to that practice of philanthropic activities, and they feel that is the end aim of all realization, where, so these impersonalists, they would engage themselves in different causes, like philanthropic causes, like opening hospitals or educational institutions, like who take to this practice of jnana yoga. They think that that is the end aim of life, is just to serve people, because they feel that way they are totally renounced. They are not caring for themselves, but they're actually caring for everybody. So that is their concept of renunciation. Whereas a devotee, he understands that renunciation means actually service to Krishna. So that is the actual renunciation which a devotee is looking at, because when you're serving Krishna, you're positively engaging your senses in a transcendental service to the Lord, and this is not on a material platform. But because the impersonalists are not aware of this personal feature of the Lord and service to Krishna, they think that renunciation means just totally renouncing everything about themselves and giving everything to the welfare of others. That's what it means.
Okay, Mataji, so that's clear said, because we see many people taking that route. They, after renunciation, they go to, but they are still in material platform. They are not into the transcendental. Yes.
Yeah, they
okay,
will still be, engaged, because this is again punya, right? In one sense. So
yes,
this accrues karma. Unless we are engaged in transcendental service, we keep accruing karma.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Mataji. So in text 6 and 7, where Krishna says that he is a swift deliverer from ocean of birth and death. So, I had a question like, don't the impersonalists, they read Shastra? Do they believe in Shastras? Because Krishna is telling that he's the one who delivers them from ocean of birth and death. Then why not they accept it? Why not they, at least, because Krishna is telling by himself. So do they believe in Shastras, or they don't believe in Shastras?
Okay, this is for the devotees, 6 and 7 verses. Okay, It is talking about bhakti, the simple path and easy path of personalness. Okay, so yes, the impersonalists, they do believe in shastras. They come to that level of realization where they know that they are not this body, but they are the spirit soul. So they do adhyayan, they do the study of scriptures, but they do it in that sense of impersonal philosophy. Like many impersonalists, they translate the Bhagavad Gita, wherein they equate this me to be damsels. They think that once they are out of the clutches of Maya, they obtain the supreme position of God. And they think that, they will become God at the end of this whole process. So they tend to, use their logic and their own interpretation and speculation to arrive at these kind of conclusions. And they feel that once they are out of these clutches of Maya, they become equal to God. So, sorry, what was your question, Mataji? I got deviated.
Yes, Mataji, my question was that do they read Shastra, then why don't they believe in what Krishna says, that he is a swift deliverer?
Yeah, because they have their own interpretation. Like if you take the because they are basing their philosophy based on logic and reasoning rather than following this footsteps of a self-realized soul. For example, if you were just to read, I'm just giving you a small example. If you were just to read these verses, like I was reading earlier in a rush, like this verses 3 and 4, when you read all this, unless you read Srila Prabhupada's purports, you will never understand that what we are trying. Sorry, not these verses. Let me show the actual verses. The step-by-step one. Like when you read this, just read the translation. Just fix your mind upon me, the Supreme Person, engage all your intelligence. Thus you will live in me always. Don't you think this kind of alludes to something like dhyana yoga? If not for Prabhupada's purports, we could interpret a totally different meaning for these verses. So it's very important to study these scriptures, under the direction and under the guidance of a self-realized soul. But on the contrary, if we try to come up with our own interpretations, we may end up totally being confused. So these impersonalists, the four bona fide disciplic succession is the four Vaishnava sampradayas, which are mentioned in the scriptures. So the other acharyas, they have this impersonalist view of the philosophy, like Shankaracharya's philosophy and other impersonalist philosophies. They tend to give a totally different interpretation to the shastras, and they arrive at the conclusion that when we are like I earlier also mentioned in the class, that they arrive at the conclusion this body is the source of all material miseries. And so the best way to get rid of this misery is to actually become totally without a form or without a body. So they don't have this conception of the personal form of the Lord. So when they read the scriptures, they arrive at the conclusion that, okay, I am the spirit soul, I'm not the body, and they want to totally do away with the conception of personal seva or personalities and things like that, relationships. They want to do away with all those things, and because they are not aware of that higher truth of a spiritual body, of rasas, of higher personal relationships with the Lord, because they are still at that level where they associate body with miseries, and so they think that the end aim is to become free of this body, and become void or merge with the impersonal Brahman. So that is how they derive their level of understanding. They derive that meaning from the Shastras. So they come to that level of realization where they realize that they're also transcendentalists, because they realize that they're not the body and they're the spirit soul. But then they stop there. They just think, okay, body means misery, so let me just do away with this existence and merge into nothingness. That's how they look at it. So that's a partial interpretation. So if you were to read books from such acharyas, impersonalists, you would come to that kind of a conclusion.
Okay, so they do read Shastras, but they read which is interpreted with their logic and reason. So that's why they don't come to this platform. So that makes more sense why Prabhupada gave us Bhagavad Gita as it is.
As it is, yeah, because we
Yes.
would be lost without the actual concept of the personal feature of, which is the full feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I mean, it is not very difficult for us to understand, right? I mean, there has to be some source of energy, and then the energy comes from that source, right? For example, the sun is there, we get sunlight, heat, all those things. But if the sun were not there, would you get sunlight, heat? Would it be kind of foolish to say that, I have sunlight and heat, but I disregard the sun totally? I mean, it will be foolish on my part, right, if I were to say such a thing. So it is, in one sense, foolish if we tend to ignore the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose energies are all displayed around us, in manifest in so many different ways, around us in the material manifestation, in the spiritual realm. It's all the energy of the Supreme Personality, of his potencies, which are displayed. So it behooves, or it makes total sense to understand that there is an energetic person behind all these energies which we see in action around us.
Yes, Mataji, wonderful. Okay, Mataji, now one more question, Mataji. When we see from 12.8 to 12.12, where there's a spontaneous platform, then regulative principle, and then Krishna says, work for me. So in these levels, finally Krishna comes to renunciation. So what is the level of the result that they achieve, Mataji? Sure, there should be some, is there any difference in the target they achieve, or they all reach the same result?
Okay, when a person you mean these, okay, for a practicing devotee, ultimately he reaches the supreme abode of Krishna, which is discussed in 12.8 through 12.10. So in one way or the other, he is engaged in devotional service, either he's a sadhaka, or if he's not able to follow the regulative principle, he's still, donating to the cause of Krishna's service by serving his devotees, or distributing transcendental literature, or coughing up money to Lakshmi towards construction of temples. So this is all again considered transcendental in that sense. It is still on the platform of bhakti. But if a person is not able to do that, this is kind of, in one sense, he says, engage in at least mundane goodness, give charity, perform yajna and jnana. So if you're going to perform a charity or yajna with some ulterior motive in your mind, like I want to enjoy all the opulences, then you will be promoted to the higher planets within the material realm, like the different devalokas, the svargaloka, and things like that, where you can enjoy all these opulences, good health, no disease, and things like that. So that will be if somebody is not renouncing the fruits, but they want to enjoy the fruits, and they engage in yajnas so that they attain some wealth, fame, or name, something like that. So they will reach such higher planets where they can enjoy. But then again, shine punya marte lokam vishanti. Once their pious credits are over, they come back to the material world. Similarly, for somebody who is in jnana or dhyana, they may actually reach the destination of the impersonal Brahman, because they still don't have the concept of the personal form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these jnanis, they don't want to do anything with the bodily conception, so they go to the impersonal Brahman. But for the dhyana yogis, they have a choice. Like Prabhupada explains in the purport. So even after all this meditative practices, this asanas, dharanas, this dhyana and samadhi and all that, the ultimate aim of that is to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these dhyana yogis, when they come to that realization, that my ultimate aim is to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and to realize, that surrender and service unto him is the highest, such dhyanis, they will progress to the spiritual realm. But if the dhyani gets deviated on this path, and he's like, okay, let me get this siddhi, let me get anima siddhi, or lagima siddhi, I'll get this kind of mystic power, let me cross the oceans, without drowning in them, let me walk on thin air, things like that. So when they're deviated and they are attached to these fruits, of their practices, then what happens is, they only go that far. And when they don't realize the personal aspect of the Lord, they also will reach the impersonal Brahman stage. but they will not reach the eternal kingdom, the Vaikuntha planets. Like they will reach the Brahma Jyoti.
Yes, Mataji. Okay. Okay, Mataji, that's clear. Then, Mataji, well, the last question, when we talk about the qualities of a transcendental pure devotee, so Mataji, is this qualities are hidden with the jiva and it will be revealed in the process of devotion, or we receive it from outside, or it is given by Krishna to us? How does the pure devotee achieve that?
Yeah, these qualities, come naturally to the devotee, because as you get closer to Krishna, the understanding is like this, Prabhupada explains in the purport that when we are engaged in the service of Krishna, we see everybody around us, we see the super soul in everybody around us, and we realize that these all living entities and all these creatures around us, they are part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we realize this thing, that everybody is a spirit soul, and we develop that equal vision, and we don't have these qualities of envy or jealousy or things like that. The other aspect is when a devotee, he reaches this platform, he realizes that the is the hand of this God in everything around him, like all these things happening around us, he sees the hand of God in everything. So at that stage, he is not disturbed by these dualities of material nature. So these things actually occur very naturally, to a devotee. He doesn't have to endeavor separately to gain these qualities, but these are, like, in one sense we can say, like side effects of bhakti yoga, which the devotee naturally acquires. So he doesn't have to do anything special. It just comes to him naturally because of his understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he develops this nice vision, where he sees everybody equally, and he develops this nice vision where he knows, okay, this is happening, maybe I did something wrong, and I'm just paying the price for it. He's not disturbed, like Tatte Nukampavash. He thinks, the devotee thinks, that he deserves something even worse, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead is kind and just putting him in this very small way. He's distressed. So devotee of the Lord is so surrendered that he is not disturbed by all this, Mataji.
Very nice, Mataji. Mataji, the last 12, 15 to 20, the examples that you gave, like Prahlada Maharaja, Rupa, Sanatan Goswami, Jada Bharat, they are so fantastic, Mataji, because when we read the purport, we don't, I mean, we are not that much qualified to get that example into the mind, but the class, when you gave the example, that was very helpful to understand it, Mataji. And thank you so much for the class, and also the slides are beautiful. Thank you for Radhika Kasturi, Mataji. And thank you for your service, Mataji. Jai Sachinandana. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Lakshmi Mataji. All glories to Radhika Mataji. She tirelessly prepares the slides every time, and she does it like magic, She's so empowered. In just 10 minutes, she can whip up these slides and give. So yeah, I'm also very indebted, and my gratitude to all the devotees who are encouraging me in this seva. Hare Krishna. Mataji, I think it's a little late, beyond 9. So
Beautiful question and answer session, Mataji. Thank you so much. If the devotees are okay, we can all adjourn for today. Vancha kalpatarupyasya kripasindubhyev cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrind ki jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantraj Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Thank you. Jai Sukha-sagari Mataji. Hare Krishna. Hari Bol.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Mataji.
Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.